First at 9 this Sunday, the 23rd of June 2024. The Eastern Cornerstone. Development of the East crucial for Sri Lanka's economic transformation, asserts the President. Further highlights solar power and wind energy projects to be set up in the East. Negative to positive. Positive economic growth in 2024 for the first time since the crisis, reveals the central bank governor. Further notes that Sri Lanka is nearing completion of debt restructuring. Defeated again. The UK's Proscribed Organisations Appeals Commission upholds ban on the LTTE. LTTE's international network trying to deprescribe the LTTE, reveals the foreign minister. Commanding the skies. Sri Lankan Airlines to strengthen its fleet in 2024, reveals CEO Natal.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබා දෙත හැක.
This is Derana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to Derana First at 9. I'm Aditya Dirusingha joining you live with the latest in Sri Lanka and around the world. Now, your top story this evening, an attempt to remove the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam from a list of banned entities in the United Kingdom failed recently. The appeal to overturn the LTTE's prescribed status was filed by the transnational government of Tamil Eelam, which supports the LTTE's objective of establishing a Tamil state in the north and east of Sri Lanka. Addressing the issue, Minister of Foreign Affairs Ali Sabri highlighted that the approach and strategy of LTTE's international network is to get foreign governments to deprescribe the LTTE so that they could revive the LTTE's operations.
The LTTE, or the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, was added to the list of proscribed terrorist groups or organizations in the United Kingdom on the 29th of March 2001. Recently, the transnational government of Tamil Eelam, or TGTE, submitted an appeal to the UK Proscribed Organisations Appeals Commission requesting that the LTTE be removed from that list. The transnational government of Tamil Eelam submitted the relevant appeal in support of the LTTE, which aims to create an independent Tamil state in the north and east of Sri Lanka. However, the UK Proscribed Organisations Appeals Commission rejected the TGTE's appeal. Taking to X, Minister of Foreign Affairs President's Counsel Ali Sabri stated that the United Kingdom will continue to maintain the proscription against the LTTE. He went on to add that the TGTE is not proscribed in the United Kingdom as it seeks to pursue their political and ideological objectives through non-violent means. Foreign Minister Sabri also mentioned that the approach and strategy of the LTTE's international network is to get foreign governments to deproscribe the LTTE so that they could revive the LTTE. Attempts made by the TGTE to lift the ban on the LTTE in 2018 and 2021 were not successful as well. India too named the LTTE as an entity banned nationwide in 1992. The Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam organization is currently banned in several nations including Sri Lanka, India, the United Kingdom, the United States of America, Canada, Malaysia and Australia.
Less sugar, same great taste. From Melbourne.
Now, highlighting the strategic importance of the eastern province as the country trails along the path of economic transformation, President Ranil Wickremesinghe outlined a series of development projects in the east. Addressing a gathering yesterday, the president further revealed plans to develop the country through advancements in the agricultural, services and industrial sectors. Reminiscing the political turmoil within the country at the height of the economic crisis, President Wickremesinghe pointed out that the country has no need of cowardly leaders who abandoned their posts during Sri Lanka's hour of need.
A meeting of United National Party representatives from the Batticaloa district was held yesterday in Batticaloa under the patronage of President Ranil Wickremesinghe.
Our country was in deep trouble in the recent past. If everyone listened to me and acted on what I said back in 2020, we would have been able to avoid a lot of those issues. I particularly highlighted that we needed $3 billion to manage the affairs of the state. None of the other political parties said so. What did the Samagi Jana Balawege and the Janata Vimukti Peramuna say on that matter? We were dismissed as liars since we were the only ones making that claim. So we were limited to just one seat in parliament. What did those in parliament power due at the height of the crisis. Mahinda Rajapaksa, the then Prime Minister, resigned from his position. Subsequently, former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa invited Sajith Premadasa to take over as Prime Minister with the SLPP's support. However, they refused to take the responsibility of the country's future. The JVP, which yearns for power at the moment, was nowhere to be found back then. Are those our leaders? Can they lead our country? Cowardly leaders are of no use to us. We came into power and established a government with the assistance of a coalition of parties. We are now on the verge of pulling Sri Lanka out of bankruptcy. Many asked me to give up the premiership and the presidency back then. Today we are almost out of bankruptcy. What would have happened if I stepped down back then? That is the question we need to ask the SJB and the JVP. They abandoned the country during its darkest chapter.
Meanwhile, President Wickremesinghe also attended the Batticaloa District Youth Representative meeting held yesterday.
We faced numerous issues during the past 2 years. Although we are out of bankruptcy, our fundamental issue remains the same. We still don't earn the foreign currency required to pay for our imports. We are not an export-oriented economy still. If we fail to address that issue now, we will once again implode into a similar crisis in another 15 years, which will completely decimate our economy. So it is imperative that Sri Lanka becomes an export-oriented economy. The country's agriculture system, services and industries should be globally competitive. We also need to increase our productivity. The eastern province must be developed significantly. Measures are underway to establish oil pipelines from Nagapattinam in India to Sri Lanka. We have decided to relocate Sri Lanka's oil refinery to Trincomalee. Further, several solar and wind energy projects will also be launched here. Meanwhile, we have prepared plans to develop tourist zones in the eastern province. We are yet to develop the Mahaveli's B zone. Accordingly, we are now preparing plans to develop that zone. So a boost in agricultural products will definitely follow. Small and medium-scale businesses will also be developed. Those efforts will be pivotal in positioning the eastern province as a cornerstone in the country's transition to an export-oriented economy.
Crunchy goodness for hunger on the go.
Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe says that Sri Lanka will record positive annual economic growth in 2024 for the first time since the economic crisis, and went on to highlight the need to persist along the narrow economic path it trails at the moment. Joining our current affairs program at Hyde Park with Indivari Amuwatta, Governor Veerasinghe went on to say that Sri Lanka is in the final steps of completing the debt restructuring program and has almost achieved short-term economic sustainability. He further said that as part of the long-term plan for economic revival of the country, Sri Lanka must ensure an economic growth rate between 4% and 5% in the coming years, while preserving the short-term gains of the country under the restructuring program.
When you say complete debt restructuring process, how soon are we looking at this? You spoke about the MOUs that are to be signed with the creditor nations, and there are talks about a delay in private debt.
There's a sequencing process. So first part is usually domestic debt we have completed last year. Then second one, official creditors we will be completing soon. The next last step is to complete commercial creditors, because the process is that once we agree to terms and conditions, others will have to fall in the same comparable terms and conditions. I am confident that we should be able to complete. We have been following and negotiating and having discussion, making progress. I think this is, in my view, we are in the last lap of this completion. But still, it's not the full recovery. I have to admit that. So first stability, then the growth in the next step. But you just mentioned by 2025, I think, in my view, even before pretty soon, we should be able to basically achieve the full stability after completing debt restructuring. Then next step is to, we would expect rating agencies to improve our ratings and then have more sustainable debt for next 10 years, not for 1 year, 2 years. Next step is to stabilize the common debt service payments for next 10 years. But by 2024, by end of this year, at least within pretty soon, as I mentioned earlier, should be a complete that part. So next part is to continuation of this kind of reforms, so that from 2025 onwards, even 2024 is going to be the first year after the crisis we are going to report positive economic growth for the whole year. We have seen already 3 quarters of last 3 quarters, we saw positive economic growth, 5.4 in the Q1 of this year. So we need to continue that positive growth momentum. So that is the path of recovery. So medium to long term, we need to ensure country will be growing at least around 4 to 5%, so that we will have much better living conditions. We have much better ability for the government to provide services for the people. That's how people's income can be increased, that they can meet the high prices that already prevailing. Their income should be going up. So for that process, short-term stability is already, I think, almost achieved. Under the program, until 2032, government will not have a significant debt burden. There's sufficient time for the government of the country to implement sufficient reforms so that our capacity to grow, potential growth can be enhanced much. That's how people can benefit. So that's where next process should be focusing on country to increase their capacity while preserving the short-term gains and keeping those gains on the sustainable basis, and also enhance our ability to grow, enhance the ability for the people to increase their incomes. That's a medium to long-term target. That's why in that direction. That's why it's important. This is a very narrow path. We need to move in that path and without falling into the pitfalls going forward, because it's a narrow path. We should ensure that we are moving in the right direction.
Now, opposition leader Sajith Premadasa reiterated that the SJB is the only party in Sri Lanka's history post-independence to serve the public while still being in the opposition. He made those remarks at the 253rd edition of the Sakwala program in Palawatta.
The 253rd iteration of the Sakwala program was held at the Miriswata Mahavidyalaya in Palawatta under the patronage of opposition leader Sajith Premadasa.
Why do these selfish individuals detest these donations I make for children? My father had to face similar criticism. When he was setting up garments factories, some criticized him by saying that former President Premadasa was using the rural youth to stitch undergarments for foreigners. They lit those buildings on fire. I have a genuine fear that they might try to light these schools and computers also on fire. Despite what those people think of me, I believe that the 22 million strong population of this country will stand with me. During the past 76 years, everything that was done with state power. That's how my father also got things done. Even when former President J.R. Jayawardena and my father were in the opposition between 1970 and 1977, they did nothing. They never did anything while they served in the opposition. However, we have done it.
Now, former parliamentarian Ravi Karunanayake says President Ranil Wickremesinghe will contest as an independent candidate in the upcoming presidential polls, which are expected to be held in another 105 days. And now let's take a look at some political news in brief.
Sri Lanka's economy is gradually stabilizing. According to the central bank report, we have achieved positive growth during the first quarter. We are expecting some good news regarding debt restructuring next week.
We heard that Ranil Wickremesinghe is going to officially declare that Sri Lanka is not bankrupt anymore. A country will not exit bankruptcy simply because its leaders say so. It must be recognized internationally. There are 2 proposals before the IMF on waiving off debt with the Paris Club and other creditor nations. Those proposals are the macro bonds and the government bonds. There is no news whether those 2 proposals were accepted or not.
Today's so-called leaders and economic experts held that this country could not be revived back then. But we trusted President Wickremesinghe and waited patiently for 2 years. The country gradually moved forward each successive day. Let's all wish that the people of this country will receive some good news by next week.
The S&P, Moody's and Fitch decide whether a country is bankrupt or not. However, the incumbent president expects to declare in parliament that the country has overcome bankruptcy. He intends to create a slogan for the upcoming election.
The Paris Club, China and India, along with other creditor nations, have agreed to declare that Sri Lanka is a debt-free country. The president will be addressing the nation on the 26th to make a special statement in that regard. The presidential election is expected to be held in another 105 days. Ranil Wickremesinghe will contest in that election as an independent presidential candidate.
Now, meanwhile, State Minister of Finance Srihan Semasinghe raised concerns that opposition parties and their main advisors are expressing unrealistic views on managing the economy as elections approach. Taking to X, the finance minister said Any reversal of the hard-earned reforms could result in catastrophe for the country. Semasinghe said the IMF and international stakeholders played a pivotal role in reshaping Sri Lanka's economic landscape, which was in total chaos in the last 2 years. State Minister Semasinghe went on to urge all opposition parties and their advisers to avoid making such false promises that may not even offer short-term gains but definitely lead to long-term pain. Further, in his X message, Semasinghe highlighted the importance in prioritizing the nation's economic stability and progress over political games. He called on everyone to engage in responsible discourse and ensure that Sri Lanka's economic policies are based on sound and realistic principles and a design of economic landscape with globally accepted and adopted good practices. And now let's take a look at some local news in brief.
A fatal collision between a bus and three-wheeler occurred near the Anuradhapura filling station this morning. 2 persons who were inside the three-wheeler died following the accident, while 2 others were hospitalized for treatment. Meanwhile, a motorcycle collided with a lorry transporting poultry in Jayantipura, Polonnaruwa. 4 persons of the same family, including a 1.5-year-old baby and a 4-year-old child, were immediately rushed to hospital. In the meantime, a 51-year-old was arrested while having a stash of heroin in his possession. The arrest was made in Badovita, Mount Lavinia. The police were later able to recover a pistol from the residence of the suspect following an interrogation. In other local news, a 41-year-old was stabbed with a sharp weapon and brutally murdered in Amudamana Katuwana. According to police, a heated argument between the deceased and a relative led to the unfortunate incident.
Welcome back. Now, Senior Lecturer of the Department of Economics at the University of Colombo, Dr. M. Ganeshamurthy, says that small and medium businesses in the export sector may be unmotivated to participate in the market due to the complicated and lengthy administrative system that currently exists in Sri Lanka, particularly when adhering to the rules of origin of global trade. He made those remarks joining a webinar themed Trade Agreements Unlocking Economic Potential for Sri Lanka, organized by the Center for Banking Studies. He further said that due to the difficulty of obtaining information regarding the origin of raw materials used in export products, a swift administration system must be introduced for SMEs in the export sector to determine whether the exported products must adhere to the rules of origin or not.
Having already discussed issues relating to these rules of origin requirements, what do you think are the primary challenges that Sri Lanka is likely to encounter in implementing and complying with these rules?
Especially this type of technical aspects may not be easily visible to the producers and exporters. The research conducted by 800 sample of exporters in one country, and it revealed that less than 20% of the exporters have made use of this concession, because number one is that they are unaware of which category they belongs to, which category of their good it belongs to, whether they have gone through a kind of a substantial changes in the form, or whether that is outsourced from a country which is not a signatory, which is not a very substantial part of the product. They allow 10 to 15% of the non-member countries' inputs. But these information are not easily passed on to the exporters or producers. They can actually provide a lot of inputs into this. One of the concerns raised in this regard was SMEs, they apply whether this is applicable to my product. And to get an answer, they have to wait for longer period of time. The time duration it takes to determine whether it is a subject to concession or not, which require more time. So this administrative bottlenecks and time-consuming exercises has to be minimized. And then the SME sector may engage in that.
The Chief Executive Officer of Sri Lankan Airlines, Richard Nuttall, has stated that the national carrier will spread its wings to the Middle East region after acquiring more aircraft on lease this year to strengthen its fleet. He also stated that the future of the airline is bright, whether the government opts for privatization or not, as the restructuring process has put Sri Lanka on the right path.
CEO Richard Natal is confident about Sri Lankan Airlines' future, highlighting strategic initiatives to modernize the fleet and expand operations. Natal stated that fleet modernization plays an important role in the carrier's turnaround, as well as catering to growing passenger demand in the region. He also claims that the airline will strengthen its current fleet of 21 to 22 in July, with plans to add 3 more aircrafts within the next 3 months to increase the tally to 25 aircrafts this year. Natal stated that they are aiming to boost the Sri Lankan Airlines fleet with more leased aircraft that will help increase frequency on existing routes as well as add 2 or 3 new routes. He also stated that the privatization of Sri Lankan is a part of the country's IMF program, under which its balance sheet will be improved by restructuring the airline's debt. Meanwhile, responding to a question, Natal said the airline's future is bright whether the government opts for privatization or decides not to privatize it, as the restructuring process had put Sri Lanka on the right path.
Now, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka appointed 2 new deputy governors with effect from the 30th and 24th of June. Accordingly, Assistant Governor and Secretary to the Governing Board A.A.M. Thasim and Assistant Governor J.P. Karunaratne have been appointed as Deputy Governors of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Newly appointed Deputy Governor A.M. Thasim has over 31 years of service at the Central Bank of Sri Lanka in different capacities, including in the areas of supervision and regulation of banking institutions, international operations, communication, payments and settlements, Employees Provident Fund, as well as in finance. Meanwhile, the secondly appointed Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, J.P.R. Karunaratne, has over 33 years of service at the Central Bank in different capacities, including in the areas of supervision and regulation of banks and non-bank financial institutions, currency management, as well as in public debt. Now let's take a look at some corporate news in brief.
Maharaja Foods Limited revealed that the company aims to raise 125 million rupees via an initial public offering. Through the planned IPO scheduled to be opened on the 4th of July this year, the company will offer a 20% stake comprising 25 million shares at 5 rupees per share. Meanwhile, John Keel's Holdings plc announced the dealings made by its director. In its corporate disclosure, the company announced that K.N.J. Balendra, CEO of the company, purchased a total of 450,000 shares at 136 rupees and 97 cents each. The relevant transaction was notified to the board of directors on the 13th of this month. In other corporate news, the annual general meeting of Colombo Dockyard plc was held recently. During the meeting, all ordinary and special resolutions indicated in the notice issued on the 27th of May this year were approved by the shareholders.
And with that, we wrap up tonight's edition of Ada Derana First at 9. Stay in touch with us on www.adaderana.lk for the latest developments around the clock. Thank you. Have a great night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit adaderana.lk.